Any moment now. All right. Hey, everybody, we are live. People will be joining us as as they get notified of the show, but it'll be recorded, so everyone will be able to watch it later. And so first, I thank you all. Thank you so much, Lavone, Wolfe, Dan Roddick, Michael, Captain Snap, Conger. Thank you all for joining today.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thanks for having me.
I'm totally honored.
No, no, the honor is mine. I'm I'm sitting with my heroes today. So I want to just give a brief introduction because initially it's a lot of my audience about who I'm talking to and why we're here, and then to a large extent I'm going to step out of the way. You know, my purpose more than anything is that I've taken on the responsibility of trying to bridge the gap between our sports history and the modern audience. I seem to be the person in that position to do so, and so it's very important to me that the founders of our sport aren't forgotten, and you all are going to help us do that with our friend Tom today. Thank you. So as many of you have heard, on February 10th we lost PDGA number 33, Tom Monroe. Tom was one of the inaugural 7 members of the Hall of Fame. And that's all I'm going to say, because in a second, I'm going to let Lavone do the introduction. I think Lavone would probably be the person best fitted for telling everybody a little more about Tom if you're new to the game. But I just want to start with a quick story to set the tone before I pass the microphone to Lavone. You know, we had heard Tom had been sick for a little while, and a few months back, Colin reached out to me and shared that there was an end in sight. It was the decision Tom made, and it was coming. And I suggested, well, how about if we do an online memorial for him? Because certainly Tom's touched, I mean, tens of thousands or more people that can't come to Alabama. And he asked Tom, and I was very honored that Tom gave me his blessing to host this event for him. So about a month before Tom passed, Tom had a little burst where he started feeling better for a couple of days, and so he reached out to me and basically said, "Hey, I would love to hear what people say about me at my memorial. Can we move it up a little bit, and maybe I could be there for my memorial?"
Oh God.
and unfortunately, this is the way it works with cancer. The strong days passed before we were able to do it. But I thought that would be just kind of a light story to start with. We almost had Tom at his own memorial today. Final request before I pass this along. The first time any of you speak, please take a couple seconds and just tell my audience who you are, just briefly, to make sure they all know who is sharing the story. But Lavone, I would love for you to start by just telling us a little bit about who Tom Monroe was.
Okay. I'm Lavone Wolfe, PDGA 580, and Tom Monroe is the man that introduced me to disc golf, to Frisbee golf at the time. And that was actually, I don't know the exact date, but I do know it was 50 years ago, within 2 weeks of right now, either direction. That's what I know. So it's been a long, long time. Tom and I were just very close friends. And as he used to like to say, he taught me everything I know, but not everything he knows. I don't think I could argue with that. So.
Oh, that's funny.
So maybe Stork and Snap. Is it Snap still? Is that?
Oh yeah. It's you can call me anything. Just call me.
Okay, I'll call you Captain Snap, or I'll call you Snap. But how about Dan? If you want to maybe jump in with where you were introduced to Tom, and
go ahead, Stork. You guys met him before I did, probably.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's true. Boy, I said to Lavone before we came on, the thing about it, we often talk about Frisbee family, and a little while ago, Scott was visiting with us here, and we were talking about that, of just how amazingly integrated those relationships are. I mean, if we sat and we tried to draw out, sometimes sociologists do it, trying to draw out connections among the individuals we know. Let's say if we took each of our address books and then drew connections among them, it would be an amazingly dense fabric of those connections. Yeah. It's just, how many hours do you have set aside for this, Scott? Because it would be hours and hours and hours of us just discovering the connections of, oh, you know, Ross Snyder, remember Ross Snyder? Well, Ross did this, and, you know, and every one of those is connected to, oh, Cynthia Allen. Well, Cynthia, yeah, she toured with him. And I mean, we could go forever in terms of that fabric. And the thing about that is, I often think, and we've lost a lot of people. I actually have a pretty long list of Frisbee people who we've lost. And this is right from the beginning of Buzzy Hellring and on down to Tom. And the thing about it is, when we lose people who are in that fabric, they're still in there. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's still pulling. And when something happens to one of the people in that fabric, we all feel that pulling on our chest. And I talked about this at the last Freestyle Hall of Fame, of just that connectivity that we have. Also has with it a kind of an immortality. That is, we are not collectively going to forget about Tom. We can't because he's everywhere. I mean, when I look around in this room, that is the Frisbee room, pretty much every artifact has some connection to Tom, directly or indirectly. And I think that's the wonderful thing about it, that he's gone. Yes, he's gone. But I mean, he's also still here in a very tangible way that is more tangible than, yeah, Aunt Joyce died, and, you know, we think about her every Thanksgiving. Think about Tom every day, many, many times, because I mean, pick up a book. I'll show my first example if I can actually make this. Okay, so Charles Tips is doing Sports and Games, second book we did together. Yeah. So we're out on a shoot. He wants to do DVC. So he says, "Oh, Stork, give me a good action shot." I don't know if you can see it, but there's my action shot. You know, here's Tom's action shot. Yeah. A handstand, you know, I'm kneeling down like a grandfather feeding pigeons, and he's an Olympic champion, you know, on one hand, diving right into the camera. I mean, the guy was a showman. I mean, our list of showmen is fairly long, but we've got some extraordinaires, Victor, Craze, and Tom. I mean, guys that just mesmerize people. I mean, let's face it, he was a mesmerizer. You look at those pictures of kids at Monroe clinics. How many of those you think went home just buzzing and became players as a result of that? I mean, the guy was a catalyst.
Right. Wow.
Yeah. How about you, Mr. Snap?
I love to hear Dr. Roddick talk. No, really, talk about fabric. It's just, I'm just so happy I'm in that Frisbee Ohana. Frisbee changed my life with the people that I've met, and I met Tom for the first time at the National Accuracy Tournament in Florence in June of '76.
Wow. It's an AES tournament there in Florence.
Yeah, it was a qualifier, and for the WFC, and first time I met Stork. and Stork actually took me under his wing for some reason, because he ended up throwing a bunch of NAS tournaments my way. But it was the first time I saw Tom and Ken Westerfield freestyle. And I think I have some old photos. We were in I think we were inside and outside, but Tom was just a professional showman while he was competing. He was just an amazing athlete. And we battled it out in all kinds of tournaments, mainly field events, a few golf, mainly at the Worlds. But it's when he and I were in the finals of a self-caught flight for a qualifier is one of my great memories of Tom. And I'm real sad.
Yeah. Well, and I'll join this discussion or this topic a little differently, because my first introduction to Tom was not the same as all of yours. Someone made the mistake in the comments of saying 4 OGs. I never let anyone slide that one past me, because I am not an OG. I cannot be an OG when there was a generation of players and then a generation of founders before me. I'm not an OG. So my introduction to Tom, because I started playing so young, is basically the same way kids were introduced to Ty Cobb at Little League Baseball. Stories, legends, photographs. I had heard of Tom Monroe. I had heard of John Kirkland and Van Miller and Ken Westerfield and Victor Malafronte long before I ever met them. And there was no internet to see them. This is the stories they told out at the courts of this larger than life character. So my first introduction to Tom was in my imagination. I did, of course, go on to meet him and travel with him a bit in Sweden with Stork as well.
Oh, yeah.
But we traveled with Stork directly. He chaperoned me with Rick Schaefer. But yeah, my introduction to Tom was all in my imagination. So Lavone, I want to know more about, because you were there for the whole boots on the ground, Southeast, like when Tom just started, what was he doing? Was he already promoting back then and spreading, or was he ever just a player?
Well, he had just begun playing. Well, I guess he had been playing Frisbee, but within a few months before that I met him, I think it was that summer, the summer before, I believe it was before I met him, he had gone to Atlanta, and he saw that there was a Frisbee competition in Grant Park. Actually, they had distance and accuracy, and there was a couple of hundred players there to compete in that, and Tom won both events. So as I understand the story, he kind of got fired up. He started doing some homework and I guess checked into Whammo, and he went to California to go out there for his sister's wedding. While he was out there, I don't know if he met Dan. I don't know if Dan had been hired for the IFA at that time, but he did go and meet Ed. And Ed, I think, was kind of taken back. Tom was he said, "You need to hire me." and I guess, Dan, you can tell us maybe what the sequence of this was, but Dan, you were hired for the IFA, and then you were traveling the country to find and get to sign some regional pros. And I don't know if did you come to Alabama and meet Tom and then sign Tom for the Southeast Regional Pro?
The interesting thing is that I visited with Tom on the way out to the job at IFA, driving the Datsun B210. Okay, so we had won the B210 at Palmieri's tournament, sold the brand new Mustang that I just bought anyway, and kept the B210. And so one of the first stops was at Tom's, and Tom was really fired up and ready to get entrepreneurial about this. And I remember sitting and talking with him, and he said, Stork, I've got this figured out. What we need to do is we need to have it be like a union. And the deal will be, if you're If you're a novice member of the IFA, then you can only charge $20 for a demo. But if you're an expert member, then you can charge 40. And if you're a master member, then you can charge 100. And I don't remember, I don't think we had world-class master yet, but he said, if we can just hold the line on that, you can make a living at this. I mean, where we just, hey, buddy, here's the rate chart. I mean, you're dealing with a Frisbee master here. We're talking $100. So we talked about that. I think my next stop was Danny McGinnis in Texas. Danny had sent me a letter, and I guess somehow I got the letter before this trip, but I didn't have time to return it. So I just went to his apartment in Texas and knocked on the door. And one of his roommates came out and said, "Oh, Danny, there's this guy from California out here, stork somebody." And McGinnis goes, "God," he comes out, "Oh my God, well, you could have called." So that was the series of, as Lavone said, of getting people in place. And then relatively soon, the regional director vans started to roll out. And I think Frisbee South was one of the first ones. Then Air Races had one, Brian Hayes had one. There might have been maybe 4 or 5, but Frisbee South was like the beginning of the line, because Tom, as you said, had been kind of pushing the concept of, hey, you need a representative out there. And of course, he had that same kind of conversation with the nascent development of the DGA, because Tom and Ed were very tight. And so Tom was one of the stalwart reps of DGA for Ed. So he had a lot of those connections going, which really made him a powerful force, particularly in the Southeast. I mean, God, he owns the Southeast. I don't think there's any player of that era that wasn't directly affected by Tom. I mean, he was everywhere.
Well, that night when I first met Tom, I lived across the street in the dorm, and it was on campus of Florence State University, which is now University of North Alabama in Florence, Alabama. And when I went upstairs to go play basketball, I looked to my right and I saw Ken Westerfield and Tom Monroe, of all people.
Wow.
You know, two future Hall of Famers were there, and both of them ran PDGA World Championships. You knew what they were going to become. But I was really fascinated by watching them freestyle. And so I went over to my right rather than go left, and I sat on top of my basketball watching these guys. I had never seen, things that they were doing. And so after a little bit, they said, "You want to throw?" And I said, "Sure." And so I jumped up and started playing with them. And they said, "Well, you're pretty good. You want to come out and play Frisbee golf with us tomorrow? We're starting to work on a course here on campus." I said, "Okay, I don't know what that is, but I'll be there." And I showed up. It was on the hillside in front of the Student Union building, and hole 1 went across the street, flew over the street to the back door of the amphitheater. And Mike, I don't know, Stork, I don't know if y'all remember, but y'all played that hole when we played the 76 golf there in Florence. By the way, it was also pouring down rain for my first round, and got hooked on it anyway. But we started in 74. Later that year, the Alabama State Frisbee Championship, which is now the oldest running overall tournament that there is. And so we started playing, started doing things on campus. Tom, of course, had not yet gotten that ban. But in 76, we did host Tom hosted the 76 NAS or Southeastern Frisbee tournament there. Yeah. And you guys came to town, all kind of people came to town. I remember names even like Rourke Travell. Y'all remember Rourke?
New York, yeah.
Monica Lou, Joe, Cynthia, of course, was there. Chow Rotman. Goodness, there's just a long name of greats that came to Florence, Alabama. And Ed was there. Part of my story was after the first round, I played with a girl in my group, and I was sitting on the hillside in front of that Student Union building, and I was looking down at my world-class 50 mold, And I asked the girl, said, what did you say your name was again? She said, Joe Cahow. And I said, oh, no wonder you're good. And then about that time, Ed started telling the story. He said, boys, next year, you won't have to throw at light poles and trash cans. I've got something that's going to catch your Frisbees. And I couldn't understand what in the world he's talking about. And I said, Ed, chains, what are you talking about? And he was telling us about the pole hole that he had invented.
Wow.
And I have got a lot of memories, and I've got some nice autographs in those days. Everybody, like you guys are still my heroes, and you became my heroes in that day. But Tom, he really got after it. I'd bought my first Frisbee. You asked a moment ago, Scott, about what he was doing. He had a motorcycle. I don't think he owned a car, and he would always come out to campus. He would put Frisbees in his motorcycle, and I bought a Super Pro from him. That was my first golf disc, and wore that thing out on campus, and I've still got it actually. In '77, we did it again, ran another tournament there, and all kind of people came to town. As we finished school, I went on to grad school. Tom moved back to Huntsville. I was back in Huntsville just about every week because he had called Ed to come in and put in Bronze Springs Park, which we just renamed the Tom Monroe Memorial Disc Golf Course at Bronze Springs here in Huntsville. And the city gave us permission to put a monument up to him, and I'll be installing that in the very near future. But Huntsville became kind of the center of the Southeast, and Tom was jumping in that van, riding, traveling. I would occasionally go with him, and I can remember some trips. I mentioned this the other day at his celebration of life. I went to Charlotte with him, and we went up, and I think we set up, it was in Freedom Park, and I remember tying ribbons around oak trees to set up a course in Freedom Park. And as far as I know, I think that was the very first tournament held in Charlotte, which of course is now a mecca for disc golf and disc sports. But there are just a lot of stories like that. He was going to Mobile and put a course in at the KOA campground in Mobile, and it was the first PDGA tournament. And that was kind of legendary. But I was just blessed to be at the right place at the right time, and I was always tagging on to Tom's coattails for the next 50 years.
When you said that about the first tournament, I'm sure I heard Ed muttering somewhere in the background. We probably ought to explain that to the listeners, because it's a really interesting story. Can you expand a little bit on that weekend and kind of the let's call it a disagreement between Ed and Tom about the quote first tournament? Can you elaborate on that a little? And
mention Craig Meyer.
Well, that's a pretty important part of the story. Craig Meyer.
Are you talking about there was a tournament at the Mount Chalet or the Chalet Apartments in California?
No. Okay, I'll expand that because I was at Ed's Craig Meyer event.
Craig Meyer,
in New Jersey. It's a ski resort. The course is no longer there, but it drew pretty well. And Ed, of course, had it in mind. He was 001. He had it in his mind to do the first tournament of the Disc Golf Association. Of course, he's 001. He's going to do the first one. But what he didn't really grasp was that Tom was also doing one that same weekend at, I believe, this course that you're describing, right? And so Ed's event, I guess, was just a one day on Sunday for some reason. God knows why. But Tom's event began Saturday. And so Tom, when Ed is starting to, tout this Craig Meyer event as the first event, Tom's going, Ed, excuse me, Ed, we were pretty much having the first tournament down here on Saturday before yours. But somewhere I've got the trophy. But Ed made it a point that on it was PGA first tournament, and then in little brass letters, not Monroe's was at the end. I made that last part up.
I was there at Craigmere, so that was I always thought it was the first one until I heard about the Mobile one. So
Yeah.
lovely, lovely story.
Well, it was ideal because both of them got to, for their whole lives, say that they had the first tournament. So who's losing? Nobody.
Excellent. Mm.
Well, so kudos, by the way, to Tom for being an outlier. You mentioned that he had a motorcycle. He was perhaps the only Frisbee player back then with a vehicle that used gasoline.
Yeah.
Perhaps. Hey, I want to mention we are doing this in part as a bit of a fundraiser, and there's going to be a link in the description, and it will occasionally bring it up. Lavone, we have a GoFundMe link up.
Yes. The GoFundMe was set up by Bill Thornton. I really appreciate him doing this. And the GoFundMe was originally set up to help with medical expenses and other expenses during this hardship for Denise and Tom. And we want to continue that because Denise does need some help. It's been very trying on her. She's held up well. She's been amazing through all of this. But we'd like to continue to do what we can, for Denise. And so if you can log in and if you can give, $5, $10 or whatever, but I mean, she would greatly appreciate that. And we would appreciate helping her.
Thank you. And if I forget, I'll bring it up occasionally, and it'll certainly be in the description. I want to ask you about something, Lavone, that you brought up. So as a person who's been fortunate enough to make a business and a career out of Frisbee and disc golf, I appreciate the entrepreneurship of Tom early on when you mentioned paid demos and paid classes. But I would like you to make an estimate for me. For every hour that Tom got paid to promote Frisbee, how many hours did he do it for free?
Oh, goodness. Every person he met, I mean, he was trying to teach them, talk to them. Literally, it consumed his life or his entire life from 1974 on. He taught at 4 different universities. I think he taught at University of Alabama, Huntsville. He taught at University of Florida. He taught at UAB, which is University of Alabama in Birmingham, and I believe he also taught at Montevallo. I get them confused, but there was another university there in Birmingham that he taught at. So not only did he teach on the field on the course, but he taught in schools. I mean, every time I would go out to Bronze Springs when he lived here, I mean, he was working with somebody. I mean, I don't remember hardly ever seeing him just playing around by himself. He had somebody there that just trying to give instruction to. And as Stuart mentioned earlier, that he called Tom a showman. I've called him a showman many, many times. I know that we've all probably got our own stories. My favorite story was in 1988 in Cincinnati during the finals. The finals were held on a ball golf course called the Vineyard. Well, we didn't get to practice. We got in golf carts and we rode around the course and we got to look at it, but we really couldn't know really how to play it because we didn't on the ball golf course. Distance perception is really kind of weird and kind of strange. I remember coming up to a hole while we were playing. Tom was playing Masters, and I was fortunate to play in the Open. I was in the top card on the Open, but we were following Tom, and so I was getting to talk to him every time. We would catch up to him because I think they were playing behind the women, and the women were taking a little bit of time. And we came up to a hole. There was a fountain in the middle of this lake, and the fountain was spraying up pretty high, probably 25 or 30 feet. And Tom leaned over and he says, "Watch this." I said, "You're not going to do it." And everybody else was trying to figure out the distance because it was kind of on a peninsula. Had to throw a hyzer shot. There was a tree up there, and they were throwing hyzers, trying to get over that water and get to it. Tom threw a shot straight through that fountain. Of course, the crowd went crazy. It popped it up another 5 or 10 feet and went all the way to the green. But he was constantly doing that. If he had to take a risky shot to play to the crowd, he was going to take that risky shot and play to the crowd. He would turn it on when he was, when it's time to focus on the shot, he would get serious. Other than that, that's about the only time Tom was ever serious.
Love that.
I think that's a really important thing to note. He had a really interesting combination of kind of aw shucks, just a country boy. Because I remember one time we had a meeting and he was heading up some educational program for WIFDF or PDGA or something. But anyway, he started out that he wanted to get this school program going. He always said it like that, school. I said, now, Tom, when you're out pushing this school program, or if they don't understand what it is, are you willing to translate it for them to let them know, let them know what you're talking about? He laughed. But that combination of super intense, as Snap was saying, man, when you look at that card for the SCF final and Monroe's on it, you better tighten your seatbelt, buddy, because it's not going to be fooling around. He had, and maybe was one of the first, although a lot of names come to mind, but to show that we had this really friendly, informal arrangement among us, but that didn't interfere with a steely competitiveness that we all came to admire. And I think that's something that was always difficult in the early public relations of disc sports, of going, a reporter would come out and they're always trying to, find their angle quickly. Oh, so it's kind of a love-in deal of, world games and everything. And well, yes and no. Yeah, we are all really close buddies, but everybody out here wants to win this more than you can imagine. And Tom, man, what a steely competitor. I mean, particularly for some reason for me, golf comes to mind because I spent a lot of time with him in golf groups. And boy, when he got into the zone, you're talking about a single-minded, top-level athlete that was getting it done.
Well, let's add then that this is something else that is part of Tom's, not just Tom's, but people of Tom's generation's legacy. The most common question I got after doing the 2022 Pro Tour, people said, hey, when Jomez turns off their cameras, let us in on the gossip. Tell us the behind the scenes. What's it really like? What are the players like? And I always disappoint them because this is God's honest truth. I say this because it's true. I go, everyone kind of likes each other. I mean, everyone kind of gets along, and the people that aren't like the best of buddies are still friendly with each other, but everyone kind of everybody's friends. While absolutely wanting to win and beat everybody every single day we play. Well, where does that come from in our sport? That is very unique to our game, in my opinion. Well, it comes from the generations before us that set the precedent that this is what Frisbee is. And we still are this. After all these years, and now there's $1 million contracts, we are still this thing that other sports I don't think have. So tribute to Tom, but also to the three of you and others from your generation, for sure.
I think it's true. It's always tempting to say we're unique, but I think it's true that the spirit of the game thread that goes across all of the disciplines. I mean, how many times have we been out there? I'm talking about being in that final of SCF, but in that same final, you can easily imagine Tom coming over to Snap and saying, have you considered backdoor?
That's my story. You stole my story. That's exactly. Yeah, Stark, you're absolutely right. We're in Manassas at Bull Run. Welcome to Bull Run, everybody. And Tom looks back at everybody and says, "Now watch this." And so I hadn't seen this back door too much. He threw this back door, got this 10 something. It's in Frisbee World somewhere. I threw the same back door and won. And he came back up to me and said something. And but of course we remained friends, but he was a showman, but he was there to win self-caught final with me. I was running that tournament, so it's easy to not win when you're a tournament director because you're doing so much stuff. But it didn't bother him. He just threw that thing, and then somehow I bested him, and we're still friends.
We probably should remember that even though there's a lot of experienced players out there, they may have no damn idea what backdoor is. Could you explain that just a second, Snap?
Well, I'm a simple person, and it's usually in the MTA, or I'll say for MTA, most time a loft, where you throw the disc and there are 5 timers, and when you cleanly catch it downfield somewhere, that's your time. So a lot of times people throw kind of with the wind. So you go like this and throw into the wind. And sometimes when the wind is coming this way and that's not working, and it was not working for Tom that day, you throw a kind of against the wind back door, not front door. And what will happen, it'll shelf. And then you've got to figure out where exactly is this piece of plastic going to go. And it usually either comes right back down at you, like at the beach, and when you're throwing on an onshore wind, or it'll helix back where you really have to start running to catch it.
Inflection too.
Yes. Inflection. Yes. I don't know all those fancy terms, but I just know how to run after it. But he was a master at the back door, and that's what I'm going to have to use from now on.
Well, and let's remember that he was fleet of foot. I mean, that's the other thing. He was really quick. And so, I mean, TRC, again, our listeners, what the hell are these guys talking about? I mean, the two parts of self-caught flight are throw, run, and catch, where we measure how far from the circle you're able to get when you catch it. Self-caught flight, first of all, is for people who have no friends. Okay, because you don't have to have anybody else. You just throw and you catch it yourself. So it's throw, run, and catch, and maximum time aloft, MTA. Those two things get merged together for self-caught flight. Before we got off, Tom, and offering advice, I wanted to it bubbled up in my brain last night when I was thinking of Tom, and he came up to Octet. I don't remember what year it was. It might have been, I don't know, 75, 74. Anyway, he's up there, and I knew him pretty well at that point. And he was throwing distance. I guess this pegs it a little bit. He was throwing it with 141s with his forehand, used to be sidearm, and they're turning over. They're all turning over on him. And he's going, I don't know what's going on. I mean, I said, well, what are you throwing? He says, 141s. And I said, well, but what kind of 141? And he said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, let me see the disc. I flip it over. They're all 51s. I said, okay, you see that stack over there? Those are all 50s. And he said, well, what is that number? I said, well, that's the mold number. That's the mold number between the two. And trust me, those 50s are going to be a lot more stable than these 51s. In fact, if I were you, I would give these away to kids as soon as I could. I said, oh, okay. So he picks up the 50s, and bam, he's throwing them out there. They're holding the line. He goes, wow, that was really cool. Thank you. It's hard to remember that we were at a point in time where we were just discovering all this stuff. Crazy.
Yeah, let me about him being an athlete or being quick. I mean, he ran track in high school and played baseball. And the TRC, he held the Guinness Book of World Records. He was in the Guinness Book of World Records for a good long while. I think he threw a 90-yard TRC, throw, run, and catch.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. Good. That's a different part of Tom. I know this thing was supposed to be about disc golf, but he was an overall player, and he and I developed a field event players association back in the early 80s. It could have been the late 70s, called Riders of the Wind. And Stork and the IFA or the WAMO front office helped us with it. But Tom designed really, you've got what's your number? 12. Okay.
12. Yeah.
All right. Well, Tom and I flipped for number 1. I won number 1. He got number 2. And I was just in my man cave looking for the master book of Riders of the Winds, and we're up to like 150. But he came up with a beautiful design, and WAMO fronted us so we could have a little bit of printed money and minis, and it was a gold one and a silver one, I believe. And so we had Riders of the Wind active for several years, maybe a couple decades.
If you lived in Huntsville or in Alabama, you didn't just play Frisbee golf. I mean, you played all the field events. Just about every golf tournament in the early days, we had other events. And
yes.
If he's going to teach you anything, he also is going to teach you how to throw MTA, TRC, distance. And he was a huge proponent of making people take the world-class Frisbee Masters test, which was, I passed, but it's probably one of the most brutal things I ever did in my life, because it was in the middle of summer, and said, good gosh, I mean, how many times is it going to take me to get a back-to-back, MTA and then a back-to-back TRC? It was brutal, but
I'm sure.
But I thank Tom for that. I mean, those are, I don't have it in that little thing that I showed you a moment ago. It's got my 4, I'm going backwards here. I've got my PDGA patch there, and Dan, I've got your IFA little gold plate there, and then I've got what is this one up here? I think that's also that's a PDGA thing, but it's all sitting on the Riders of the Wind, because if you can't ride the wind, you can't play golf, you can't do anything. And this was always special to me. But I thank you guys. I mean, that's field events was, in my mind, it was right there with golf, especially in the early days. And I love throwing MTA.
Well, it had to be. So one of the interesting things about flying discs for my audience is they were not created and designed for an existing sport or activity. Basically, someone said, hey, we can injection mold plastic and this thing will do more things in the air than a ball. Let's make them. And right there on the back of the early Frisbees, it was stamped, invent games.
Yeah.
So the flying disc came before the games it was used for. And so in the early days, everybody, the 3 people with me included, were inventing games. No real probably idea at the beginning which of them would catch on. Was it going to be self-caught flight or guts? Was it going to be freestyle or Frisbee golf, which came later after many of the other? And so in the early days, if you wanted to be a disc athlete or a Frisbee player, you had to play everything. Yeah. Like there were no specialists until maybe the 80s-ish before people really started to say, I like this game. I don't like running. I think I'll stick to Frisbee golf. Or I enjoy running. I think I'll take up ultimate. Or I enjoy drinking. I'll play guts.
Yeah.
But
here in Huntsville, we had our club was the Rocket City RCDC, the Rocket City Disc Club. Mm-hmm. We didn't form a single golf club until 1983, when we knew that we were going to host the World Championship. And I remember sitting out at hole 1 on campus at UAH. As usual, I had my car windows down and the doors open and the radio blaring, and the Pretender song came on back on the chain gang. They said, that's it. We'll be the Rocket City Chain Gang. And so that was the first Frisbee golf club that we had. Was not until 1983. As far as ultimate goes, when we were still in 1976, when we were still on campus over in Florence, Tom and I think a couple of guys out of Texas. You mentioned Ross Snyder earlier, Stork. Ross Snyder, some boys out of Atlanta and Georgia and Tennessee and Alabama went over and played against some boys out of Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas on campus. We met on campus at Oxford, Mississippi, on campus of Ole Miss, and played the first ultimate game in the South.
Wow.
So not only did we do field events, but we played ultimate. We had an ultimate field, had an ultimate team. We started traveling as the ultimate started growing, and good gosh, I played ultimate for decades. Finally quit after I broke 3 ribs and I couldn't go to the PDGA Worlds that year. So
Crazy.
yeah,
Well,
if you knew Tom and you're throwing a Frisbee or doing any kind of disc, you were going to do everything.
Well, we didn't really talk, other than him being a showman, about his freestyle, but it's interesting that this whole show is freestyle. That is, we don't know where we're going, and that's how I don't know that Tom ever had a competitive routine. He had so many things he could do and had done them so often. I remember clearly that one of my first Frisbee buddies was Jimmy Scala, who I met in New Jersey. I think he was 12 or something. He was playing in a sandbox when we pulled into his parents had a place called Tina's Motel and Trailer Court, very classy. And anyway, we were moving our trailer from to go to Rutgers in grad school. And so here's this little kid playing in sandbox. And I said to my wife, "Oh, there's my guy. Okay, he's going to be the guy." And it turned out, that he was just a wonderful companion and enthusiast, and we went to IFT together, etc. But he ends up being Tom's freestyle partner in the Rose Bowl. Wow. And I mean, what a cool situation that was for Jimmy to have this guy. I mean, that's what has always been so interesting about the sport. I mean, you were talking, Lavone, about you're sitting on your basketball watching these 2 icons, 2 of the best ever. I mean, the first sidearm I ever saw was Victor Malafronte's at IFT. Jimmy and I drove up there together to see it, and we're like speculating on what this is going to be like. We had Stansel's book in hand, and Dad and I thought the sidearm was made up. We thought that was a joke. Couldn't be done. We tried it, couldn't be done. We get out of the car and see Victor throw his macho sidewinder. I'm going, oh my God. So arguably the best one ever is the first one I see. And when you're watching Tom and Ken, they're jamming back and forth. That's like you're wandering to the gym and it's just Magic and Shaq, just fooling around. And they say, "Hey, kid, do you want to play?" I mean, come on, man. That's nothing like that.
Yeah.
I'm sure glad you brought Jim Scala up because we're linked at the hip for a reason. Because I went to Florence that time and met Tom and Westerfield and everybody, you got hooked on disc golf and all the other events. Okay, the season was over, and I go back to Wallops, and I'm sitting at lunch with Annette, and I get this phone call from Joe Cahow. She says, "Are you sitting down?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah." She said, "You made it into the 76 Rose Bowl, the World Frisbee Championships. You're the last person to get in. Guess what? We're going to send you an airplane ticket, but it doesn't have your name on it. It's got Jim Scala's name on it." So
things were a little looser then.
Pre-TSA, pre-9/11, here I am heading to New York on my dime, getting into this airplane with a bunch of people. It was a magical trip. It had Irwin in it, it had Cray in it, it had Jens in it, it had probably Tom, and who knows, maybe even I don't know who was back in the 76 Rose Bowl. But we wowed the audience all the way to LA and throwing discs back and forth and everything. But Jimmy and I have talked several times, and he was so glad that he had to go to college, and that's where he met his wife. He says, I would have never met my wife if I had gone to the Rose Bowl that time. And he's got 3 beautiful kids, beautiful life. So I thank him every day for that, for being able to. I had to make a decision. It was either go to that or go to a wedding, my brother-in-law's wedding. Whew, man, what? So thank you, Jimmy.
I want to jump ahead a little bit because, we all know Tom was a great guy. He was a great Frisbee player, but he was also important in a lot of measurable ways. And there's one story a few people have commented about that all 3 of you are better equipped to tell. Probably all 3 of you could tell. It's on open forum. But there was a period when the Disc Golf Association was run by Ed Hedrick. And, Ed Hedrick is the first face on the Mount Rushmore. He took our sport to where it got to at that point. But there was a point in our history in the early 80s where it had begun to outgrow him. Maybe you can rephrase it if that's not correct. But there was a transition between Ed and what became the Players Organization. And it's a great story. I did not realize what a part Tom played in that. I knew about Darrell Lynn and Smethers, but I didn't realize Tom had played a part. Can one of you share?
I think what was an important start to that, if you want to call it a rebellion, but Tom wanted to run the first PDGA Worlds, and Ed said, no, you can do it next year. And of course, he ran it in California. In '83, Ed was very protective, and he wanted only his disc or DGA disc to be used. And there really weren't any technical standards at the time. And I believe after the Wally, I heard Greenville talking about this the other night on Mace Man's on their program, how they had the Wally in a Toronto tournament. And if I remember correctly, there was another disc that would fall through the baskets. And so that kind of is what enabled Ed to decide, okay, we need a diameter or a minimum diameter for the disc. But he was pretty staunch that he said, no, we're only going to play in world championships with the DGA disc. And so Tom and I said, no, we're going to open it up. And that was kind of like a revolt, a rebellion. I think Ed got over it pretty quick. He was a little bit hurt initially. And I think because of that, he put both Tom and I on his steering committee for the PDGA, because we were in constant communication with him in those days with snail mail, with regular letters. And I have found some of those letters going through my old stuff and through some of Tom's stuff. And I'm sure I'll probably run across more as I plow through them. Denise wants me to, look at all, come over and take a look at everything. But I think it was the following year, it might have been 2 years later, the following year at the Worlds, the players were already kind of saying, Ed, you can't run the PDGA and own it. You can't own a business. There's a conflict of interest there. And finally, Ed, he relented and said, yeah, he'll turn it over to the players. He stayed on the board for a good while, I suppose, best I remember. Dan, you might remember more of that. Snap, you probably do as well. But it was kind of shaky. A lot of people don't really understand just how shaky the PDGA was in those early days. And I think because it was kind of still loose knit, there's still to this day, I know a lot of records. There's a lot of tournaments that we all probably played in that's not on the PDGA website. And we don't get credit for those. I don't know if it really means anything. It probably does if you won those tournaments, and you don't. There's not a record of you having more wins. But I kept a pretty good spreadsheet. In the early days, I didn't have Excel, and I just wrote it by hand. But for whatever reason, I kept everything, as I'm sure a lot of other people did. The newsletters that stork that y'all were sending out. Tom started the South Salem Circular. I kept all of that stuff because I felt one day it was going to be significant and this sport was going to be something. And I'm glad that I kept those things.
Well, just a note about those early tournaments. For a number of years, PDGA had a project that Lori Gibson actually was doing most of the labor of putting it in, of picking up these earlier tournaments. So if you have data on those that aren't entered in the database, let me know, and I'll hook you up with the people who will put it on, because they're eager to put them on. If you've got the data, they're more than happy to put it in. It's just they searched for as much as they could grab, and some of it, I mean, we have to we have to be conscious of the fact. This is probably a good time to put this on. We have to be conscious of the fact that time is passing.
Yeah.
Right. You can see it right there. It's actually every second. That second's gone now, and there's another one, and it's gone as well. Anyway, and a lot of this stuff that is out there in individual drawers and file cabinets and that kind of thing. I mean, now is the time to preserve it. And you know, there's a number of efforts. I mean, the Midwest Archives under Peter McCarthy, they're doing a tremendous job. Hubie and the Flying Disc Museum online is an unbelievable resource. And boy, anything they can grab, they love to put it out there. And once it's there, then we all have it essentially forever. I mean, barring apocalypse. But anyway, it's really important to preserve that stuff, because historians are going to be interested in a lot of these things that we're talking about. And when they go and look and there's gaps like that, we should try to help them fill it.
You know, I know that some of the players have contacted the PDGA and they have only partial information. I mean, yeah. Even in Tom's South Salem Circular, he would post the results, but he might only post the top 4 or 5 people in each division. And so you don't get credit. All the other people do not get credit for that. There's people that got trophies. Look, here's my trophy. I won this event. Yeah. But we don't have complete records. And so I think if they would even recognize from the flyers, there were a number of newsletters across the country that would give the top winners of those tournaments. I wish the PDGA would allow us to go ahead and at least list those, because there were events that people won, but there's no record of it.
Yeah, well, they'll take whatever. I mean, I know the standard for Frisbee World was that we would list the results. I mean, it varied because we would list the results down as far as it took to get to me. And then, and then we didn't do the rest. So sometimes that was a very complete list. But anyway.
I want to share something for you. Tom, Stork was saying something about the all shucks factor for Tom. Here is, I guess it was in one of the Frisbee World magazines about the Eastern National Accuracy, June 12th and 13th, Florence, Alabama, host Florence Frisbee team. And it talks about the events, talks about free housing, the first 10 paid, dorm rates $4 a night. Not bad. Wow. Meals in the dorm cafeteria, $1 to $2, you know, that kind of stuff. But it was under Tom Monroe on Meridian Avenue, Florence, Alabama. But at the very end, he says, y'all come.
Y'all come. Yeah.
Y'all. So that's the all shucks thing going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Florence Frisbee team, they were very, very early. And I know there were other guys in some of those bands that were traveling around doing shows as well. Tom put together a pretty large group. I think at one time, I was not a part of the Florence Frisbee team. I couldn't travel and do what they were doing. But they had probably about 5 people at one time that they would crowd in that van and travel around doing shows. I don't know how they did that, but we had one member of the Florence Frisbee team at his celebration the other day, and that was Mike Collins.
Oh, really,
And,
Mike? Wow.
Yeah, Mike Collins was there. I remember Mike Collins and Wayne Walters, Cynthia, got Marty. I can't remember Marty's last name, but you know, I remember watching these guys. They taught me how to throw wrist flip, and then of course Tom and Ken taught me early on about how to throw a sidearm. I could throw a sidearm in those days, but I broke my wrist when I was 21. I only been playing about a year, and that shut my sidearm down for life. But
well, Debbie Strasser was
Debbie,
one of those
right?
touring players as well, as I recall. Yeah, that man, you can imagine when that team arrived at a school, they must have just blown minds. I mean, wow.
Yeah.
So a question just came in. I'm passively listening to some of the comments, but I asked about how much tournament directors paid themselves. And it's something that if you're new to the game, you might not realize, but it was probably about 40 years of the sport's existence before a single tournament director broke even. And that is not an exaggeration. And then when they did start making money, let's say they made $400 after 300 hours worth of work, they were earning a fraction of minimum wage. Nobody ran tournaments. Nobody. Zero people ran tournaments for anything other than just the love of the game and wanting to share the game and, you know, put something on for their friends, because 12 other times that year you got to go be a player somewhere because someone else did what you did. And Tom and everyone here understands that.
That's exactly true. I mean, the mentality, I can remember Gary Subert and Flash and myself sitting looking at Octad budget. And the question was, well, what's this going to cost us? You know, how much is it going to cost us? And we weren't figuring to make anything. But the mentality was, we went to the other people's events. You know, we went up to Rochester and we go to Philly and do all those. It was if you were hosting a party. So we're going to have a party at our place. Of course, it's going to cost us something. You know, we're not going to make money on the party. I guess people do these days. But anyway, frat house, they make money. But it was, yeah, it's going to cost us something, but then we'll go up to Rochester, or we'll go up to Boston, and then that'll be their treat, you know. But everybody just had baked into it that you were going to lose money. I mean, that's how it was. So sure, you're right on. I mean, it wasn't for quite a long time, really, when we started to kind of collectively be dealing with TD burnout. And a lot of this was driven by PDGA Worlds, where the old joke was, you know, when somebody ran a good PDGA Worlds, you'd say, well, you won't see them again for a number of years. You know, they're going to have to recover from that, you know, their personal financial disaster and exhaustion, right, et cetera, et cetera. And we said, well, if we're going to have some sustainability here, we've got to make it reasonable for people to do this work. I mean, it's professional level work at this point, and we're trying to pay the players. We have to find some way to sustain the people who are making it possible. And so it was kind of a hard gear shift of saying, well, what's this in the budget that the TD is going to make some money? What's that? Well, that's because she has other things they could do with their lives, and we want them to do this. You know, so it was a transition for sure.
You know, Dan, it wasn't even that. You all remember these conversations when there were the World Championships coming up to Minneapolis, St. Paul. We would all sit around and say, what a shame. That was such a great club they had that won't be, almost non-existent the following year. The World Championships broke clubs consistently. and you mourned the loss of the club before the event, but we're grateful. I even remember in my era where the PDGA would be scrambling. We don't have anyone to run a World Championships next year. Who can we talk into doing it? It wasn't. They weren't fighting for the right to run the World Championships. It was we might not have one next year. Thank God so and so stepped up.
Yeah, thank God that John Houck ran back-to-back Texas Worlds.
94, 95, yeah.
Without him, we would have certainly had a hole in our history.
I got a 5 to add to that story. When John Houck in Huntsville, Alabama, brought it was a big deal because a representative of the city of Port Arthur came to the Huntsville World Championships and made an impassioned speech to the members why we want you to bring the World Championships to Port Arthur. And I had a conversation afterwards with John Houck where he was just laughing, saying that was the biggest waste of breath ever. Nobody else wanted to do it. And he thought he was trying to convince. He was making a sales pitch. Please let us run Worlds.
I think John in Port Arthur and Huntsville is the only that's run 2? The only ones that's run 2?
Yeah, but we're back to back, right?
We didn't run it back to back. We ran it in 83 and 93.
Right. Back to back.
Charlotte,
that's right.
Yeah.
Well, thinking back to Port Arthur, what was it there? It was like 104 degrees, and I think the humidity was 120%. I can remember seeing the moisture running down the window of the Waffle House as we walked in. And this is probably oversharing. And can you edit this at the end if it's too much? But I still have a persistent skin rash from that tournament.
That was refineries.
No, it was the DEET. I tasted DEET in my mouth for 2 weeks after.
Yes.
The helicopters also spraying the island every single morning for the mosquitoes.
Oh, yeah. God. Thank God we had golf carts.
Oh, please allow me to add to the golf cart portion of the story, or unless you have something.
Oh, man, yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I saw John Houck tune in, and he'll appreciate this. So the biggest mistake, if you ask John, that he made at that tournament was he allowed players to rent golf carts at a very reasonable, like $5 or $10 for a day or something. Except back then, everyone was so poor, they realized, well, why would I rent a golf cart for $10 when I could get 9 of my friends to each pay $1 and 10 of us can ride on the cart? And the fact that by the end of the week, every single golf cart was thoroughly wrecked, and John had to flip the bill for the golf carts that he was kind enough to let us drive in 120% humidity. Thank you, John, for allowing us to.
Yes.
Well, just one note about these early events, and it relates to the NAS meets as well, the North American Series. That Tom and company hosted. But in these early events, there was relatively little central support. It was mainly that you were looking to find somebody who you knew had some experience and they had an acceptable venue. And then, I mean, geez, on those NAS meets, it would be fortunate if my staff, Danny and Al and Joe and Patty and others would come in a day early, maybe. And it was even true of PDGA Worlds. I mean, we can remember PDGA Worlds where they're literally laying out the course during the players' meeting. They're not able to tell you, well, we think 13 is either going to be, well, I don't know. Chris is out painting the tees now. But you'll see it in the morning when you get there. The 13, you'll see. And of course, that means we know absolutely nothing about the quality of the design, and everybody had the responsibility in that area. It wasn't like PDGA did central scoring and payout and all that. That was part of the local team's responsibility. they did the registration. So they had to kind of build that from scratch and do the reservation, all of the local stuff, of course. But they were also handling the statistics. They built that from scratch. And so maybe they had a big board. How many times do we see, the big boards with, Rick Schaefer's there writing, with his pen on there of the scores? All of that was individual. Well, if you're working with a Tom or a Harold Duvall or somebody like that, okay, it goes pretty well. But there were a lot of times when those teams were inexperienced in at least a few of the components. And so you're there, it's 11 o'clock at night, and people are pounding on the dorm rooms going, hey, do you know, did I make the cut? Well, they're figuring it out. They're figuring it out. I mean, about they should know in a few minutes. It's almost midnight, and you can't tell me if I made the cut tomorrow. I should be in bed. Wow, those were exciting days.
Wow, crazy.
Well, so Lavone, can you share? Tom ran the Huntsville World Championships in '83, which I was at the second one in '93. But how did that come about?
Well, like I said, he wanted to run the first one, and Ed wouldn't let him, and so he told him that we could have the second one, and so we kind of got a jump start on that. Tom, he was pretty adamant. He said, look, in those days, actually, you got to remember, they paid 25% out in payout. I'm sorry, about 10%. They moved it up. But Tom said, look, most of the people are going to come into Huntsville, they're going to leave here with nothing but memories. So we got to make sure if we're going to support the city, we want the city to like what we're doing. And he was sort of setting a standard for the future by working with a tourism bureau. I don't know if anybody ever worked with a tourism bureau before that for a Frisbee tournament, but I was his co-director. And so we started working with with the tourism bureau and the Parks Department and the Sports Commission. So we lined up all these activities, and we really tried to press people, bring your wives, bring your kids. So we're going to have things for them to do. And of course, here in Huntsville, we got the Space and Rocket Center, Redstone Arsenal, and we scheduled some other activities for them. And Tom was the one that really put me to work to try to make that happen. And if you guys remember, we held the players' dinner inside the Space and Rocket Center, and that was pretty impressive. And so it helped us in the future. I said, okay, well, let's do this again. Well, it was 10 years later when we did it again. I was the tournament director for that, and Bill Wagner was my assistant for the '93 Worlds. But Tom, he had a lot of insight. I started getting to know Tom pretty early. When I first met him, I said, here's this Frisbee. Here's this hippie. All he wants to do is just throw Frisbees. But there was a lot more to Tom as far as his insight. He was very intelligent. He had a lot of insight, and of course, his people skills. He wanted to please people. One of the things when I wrote the article for the PDGA a few weeks ago, when I was sitting in Tom's house a few weeks before he passed, and his trophy room was magnificent. And I asked Tom, I said, Tom, what do you want to be remembered for? And he looked over at his trophies, and he kind of shook his head, and he looked back at me. He said, Lavone, he says, I just wanted to always make people smile. If I could make people smile, that was his mission. So again, even in running the tournament, the World Championship in '83, he wanted to try to leave people with a good memory of Huntsville when they left here. And then in '93, we did the same thing, just try to bring the wives and the kids to this event. And I don't know that there's been a few events that they did other activities, and they focused on not just the Frisbee players, but the disc golfers coming into town. I learned a lot from Tom over the years, and I was kind of hurt when later in 1983, after the World Championship, Tom got married and moved to Gainesville, Florida, and said, dang, we can't let this fall apart. And so it was my motivation to try to always, here in Huntsville, just honor Tom what he started. And still to this day, that's what we try to do here.
Okay. I want to jump in. If you're joining us, we are in part, aside from remembering Tom, we're raising money for Tom's wife with the expenses that come with this horrible C thing that at our age, we probably crosses our mind more than it did when we were younger. But there's a GoFundMe account set up. I would say that certainly in the Southeast, if you play a course, it was likely put in from the work of somebody who played disc golf at a course that was touched by Tom Monroe at some point. If not Tom Monroe touched the person that put that course in. So this was a great opportunity if you want to reciprocate. I know the family would appreciate it. I think we should maybe lean towards wrapping it up. I would love it if everybody had a story about Tom. Is there one story that we want to share? I know there's more than one.
One of my favorite stories of Tom, as far as his competitive days, we'll go back to the '83 Worlds, and we were playing the semifinals out at Redstone Arsenal back before 9/11, when we could get on Redstone Arsenal. We can get on there now. It's a little bit more difficult. But Tom got to play both Open and Masters division in 1983. And so he would play 2 rounds a day. But during the Open round on Redstone in the semifinals, I came in and I thought I was hot stuff. I'd shot the best round I'd ever shot at Redstone, and at a 12 under par. And so in those days, it was Ironman. We really didn't count any par 3s. That was all playing. I mean, any par 4s. That was counting all par 4s. And somebody looked at me and said, that's not that good. They said, Harold Duvall, he came in, I think he's at 14. And hold on, Tom's at 14 on his last hole. And so he aced it.
No.
Really?
For 16 under on all, we count them all as par 3s on Redstone Arsenal. Nobody's ever come even remotely close to that using golf discs today. And that course has not changed that much since those times.
No, I didn't shoot that well. I played out there. I thought double digits was a great score in '93.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Dan or Snap?
That's a good story that where we played 2 divisions. I think Tom and I and Steve Slizer and maybe one other player played in Rochester, one of Jimmy Palmieri's tournaments, and we played. Talk about Ironman, going up and down Ellison Park.
Ellison Park.
Hills, not to say anything, Lavone, but yours was pretty flat. Rochester, these hills are carved out of glacier action, and 2 rounds, one in the Open, one in the Masters. That was something. And guess what? Monroe beat me. So it was so much fun. So much fun. We can't play 2 divisions anymore.
Stork?
Well, I think I just want to go back to that Frisbee family fabric that I was talking about, and realizing that if we did do that layout, that graphical connection of people, I think we need to realize what again, sociologists call such people stars of what a star Tom was. That just take a few minutes, pull your address file out and make some of those connections, and the density of people who either were affected by him in just a short connection, because as Lavone said, I mean, he was an incurable teacher. That is, I mean, kids standing there not doing something, or let's say an attractive young lady. Anyway, he was connected to them and sharing that all the way up to, let's imagine how many people have him on their list of people who changed their lives Wow, that's a big list. And then people who consider him one of their dearest friends.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what the statistics are on how those things look for an average person, but this is a mega life when you've achieved that. And Lavone summed it up with that final conversation with Tom of it was about those connections. All the other stuff hanging on walls, that just happened as he did that. It was those connections, and man, what a champ. I mean, he won that.
An example of that, and I've been using the same thing, threads in the fabric of disc golf. And we're all threads in that fabric. And I gave an example at his celebration the other day. One of our players, he was well known at one time, and one time I thought he was the best putter in the world. His name is George Coffin. George and his wife Andrea, they were students at the University of Alabama, Huntsville here, and they took Tom's Frisbee class, and so they started playing. I remember George came out one day, and I played a round with him. I'd never met him before, and after the round, I made the mistake of telling somebody, said, that guy needs to go learn another sport because he's never going to be any good at this. They went and told him what I said. But George started working and working and working, became one of the top players in those days, one of the top players in the world. And we traveled together. George graduated from UAH and moved to Medina, Ohio. Medina, Ohio, when he got there, I think he met the Jenkins, who was carrying around in baby strollers a little Avery and a little Val. There wasn't a disc golf course there, and so George said, we got to put a disc golf course, a Frisbee golf course in. And so he put that Frisbee golf course in. And what do we get? And we would get another group of legends out of one family. And that is just examples like that. If we were, like you said, Stork, if we went out there and we started tracking down and looking at the lineage of this sport, yes, it wasn't only Tom, there was other people, but I think, in my opinion, there's a reason why Tom on his Hall of Fame plaque calls him the Johnny Appleseed of disc golf. In my mind, he is probably, if not the most, is one of the most significant people in the development in the thread of disc golf. And for the people that are watching this and they don't know who Dan is, I mean, you mentioned it earlier, the Mount Rushmore. If we had Mount Rushmore of disc golf, Ed Hedrick's on there, Stork is on there, I think Tom is on there. Where Ed really started propelling things with the development of the basket, and Dan started propelling things with already even before that with the IFA, pushing this sport forward, organizing events, making us credible, giving us credibility. And Tom was out there, not just in the Southeast, but traveling far past the Southeast in that van, spreading and growing disc golf. And then the people that started following him with the generations. I remember we would sit back and talk. Well, one day we had athletes in the sport. We talked about, we're going to see some really good athletes get involved in the sport. And we would also talk about, it was going to be 2 generations in before we didn't have to go and beg, please let us put in a Frisbee golf course and we'll raise the money and put it in. Well, nowadays people are making pretty decent money designing and installing courses and pretty good money with contracts playing disc golf. But we said it'd be 2 generations in before people would reach the position in life and position in the corporate world where they didn't have to go and ask somebody else to sign the check. They can sign the check. So that's what we're seeing today in this sport.
Well, I want to just quickly add to Lavone, your friend that went to Medina, Ohio to put the course in, where world champion Avery Jenkins and 3-time world champion Valerie Jenkins came from.
And
well,
Sharon,
when they were a little bit older, they were mentoring a young kid in Medina named Ricky Wysocki.
well, I was going to mention that. And Ricky
Wysocki.
Wow.
So I want to share my story with Tom, and I love that Stork gave you the perfect segue to this, because this is as much about the Frisbee family, or how I would explain to people what we mean by Frisbee family. Because it's camaraderie, it's love, it's all this, the connections. This is a great illustration of this. So the last time I saw Tom was just a couple years ago. I was in Huntsville, and so I sat down and spent an hour with Tom. immediately start reminiscing about names, some with us, some not. And at some point in the conversation, we started talking about the super puppy. And I said to Tom, I go, you know, Tom, do you know the story of why there's a super puppy and no longer a puppy? And Tom says, I know exactly why, but I would love to hear what you think. And I said, I go, maybe this is a rumor, but I'm pretty sure. I said, Jan Sobel did the puppy, but he was in part funded by Ed Hedrick, and he got behind in his payments. Ed came to pick up the mold, put it in the back of his truck, and fell out of the back of the truck and broke. And then Jan had to then create a new mold called the Super Puppy.
Right.
And as I'm telling Tom this, his jaw is wide open. And when I finish, he says, first off, yes, that's exactly what happened. But second off, how do you know this? And I think there was a moment there where the answer was unspoken, which is, well, of course, a kid in California and his uncle in Huntsville, Alabama, know the story because this is how families work. Of course, we know what our great uncle Ed Hedrick did and our cousin Jan Sobel went through because we're a family. And of course, we know what happens within our family. There's a connection between me and this 20-year older player 2,000 miles away that's one player separated who happens to be the founder of our sport. That's what our Frisbee family was. It was a family. It's the only word. And I hope Tom would appreciate that is part of his legacy.
Absolutely.
You guys, thank you. I think it means the world to everybody to, just to get to know Tom a little better. Thank you, Lavone, for everything that you've done throughout this whole process to remember Tom. It means a lot to all of us. I loved reading your PDGA article. It was beautifully written. And final thing I'll leave you with, there's a GoFundMe account. And the family, Tom's family, Denise specifically, would benefit from any support that she had through this FundMe account. It's an opportunity for us to give back for a fraction, a tiny fraction of everything Tom's given to all of us. So if you can, I would love that. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you, Scott.
I have just one final anecdote.
Sure.
I talked with Tom on the phone, probably a month or so before he left. And he said how gratified he was that pretty much everybody who came in contact with and got inspired, like Lavone was saying, seeing those two guys freestyle, that I can't tell you what joy it gave him. And he specifically mentioned this, that you, Snap, and Lavone have turned into world-class freestylers on the basis of your relationship with him. And that gave him such pleasure.
I'm not sure about that one.
Okay, I made that up.
After time. Thank
All
you.
right. Hey, I love you guys to death. Thank you so much again. And maybe we can get together in my living room sometime soon.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for setting this up, Scott.
Yeah, definitely.
It was a great gift. Thank you.
Yeah.
No, it was for everyone. So yeah, thank you to Tom.
PDGA 33 forever.
All right, thank you guys.
Thanks, guys.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Yeah, I heard the bird in the background.
And we're gonna end the recording.